All right, well, it's 10 o'clock, so we'll get things started. Everyone, welcome. We're so delighted to have everybody joining us today, and I'm going to turn it over to the Destination Door County's President and CEO, Julie Gilbert, to get us started.
Thanks, John. I think John's going to now share his screen, and we can make sure we utilize your time efficiently. Perfect. Well, listen, thank you so much for everyone here taking the time to be with us and to learn more about Destination Door County's Community Investment Fund. Our board of directors and our entire team are super excited about this program moving forward in partnership with the Door County Community Foundation. So I am going to provide you with a brief overview of the Community Investment Fund, and then we'll turn it over to Mr. Brett McCoy, President and CEO of the Door County Community Foundation, to go through those nuts and bolts and of how that application process will work. And then we'll open it up for questions. And as Destination Door County has evolved into a community shared values organization that balances sustainability for our businesses and our organizations and our environment, the DDC Board of Directors, along with our tourism zone commissioners, recognized that it was essential to better support our local municipalities and other organizations because of those demands on the local tourism infrastructure. So an initial task force was created, and with the Community Foundation's direction and facilitation, the Community Investment Fund was created. So we're looking forward to seeing projects that are strategic and have long-term impact, projects that cross municipal boundaries and benefit many, and projects that are not only good for our visitors, but also benefits our residents. And the visitor economy benefits residents with some of the following items. When people visit Door County, they spend money here, which creates jobs for all our families. It generates incremental tax dollars, providing economic opportunities, and it supports the amenities that enhance our quality of life. And the visitor economy does help make life better for Door County residents. The Community Investment Fund, created in partnership with the Door County Community Foundation, is a natural evolution of Destination Door County's work. And using a portion of the room tax dollars paid by visitors, the Community Investment Fund will offer grants to projects that improve the quality of life for those who live and work in Door County. And Wisconsin state statutes require that we use room tax dollars in ways that benefit visitors. So that must be a requirement of any application to the Community Investment Fund. However, to earn a grant from the Community Investment Fund, a project must also demonstrate how it will meaningfully improve the quality of life for our residents of Door County. And some of those priorities will include creative ideas that have meaningful impact on the people who live and work in Door County, having an impact that crosses those municipal boundaries, encourages collaboration, leverages additional resources, along with residents experiencing the positive impact of tourism. And the more of these priorities that are addressed by an application, the more likely it is that a project will a grant. And now I'm going to turn it over to Mr. McCoy, and he can provide additional details and all the great information on the application process. So thank you. Over to you, Brett.
Thank you. Before we dig into the details here, I guess the first thing I'd like to say is thank you to our friends at Destination Door County and the Door County Tourism Zone. This is some remarkably creative thinking on their part to even imagine that such a program like this might exist. It's certainly permissible under Wisconsin state statute, but it is not something that many other communities do. It's a testament to the quality of the people that are leading these organizations and their own creativity. You know, what is so refreshing to me, who works in the world of charity and philanthropy all day long, is, you know, I love the perspective that this program presents, which is essentially that tourism is a means to an end, right? I mean, we want to be welcoming people to those who are visiting our community because we're just welcoming people. We love Door County, and we'd like to make sure that other people have a good time while they're visiting Door County. But the reality is, visitors coming to Door County are a tool to improve the quality of life for those of us who live and work in this community. And that's an important distinction, right? Where we as a community want to be generous to our visitors. We want to have them, make sure they have a good time, but we recognize that when they come here, they create jobs, they generate wealth, they help provide amenities which we as residents are able to enjoy as well. So it's a wonderful program that they've launched, and their creativity in trying to head in this direction should be commended. So I think everybody should join me in just giving some kudos to our friends at Destination Door County and the Door County Tourism Zone for their willingness to explore and express such a creative program. Now, that said, we want to, of course, get into some of the details here about what this would look like. We are using room tax dollars, and as a result, we have to be governed by Wisconsin state statute. And so, you know, we've always heard the phrase over the years that something is necessary but not sufficient. Well, it actually applies in this situation more than most. It's necessary that the project that you bring to the Community Foundation for consideration, it's necessary that it improves the experience for tourists, but that's not sufficient. That's sort of the minimum qualification that is required. When you meet that minimum qualification, you now have to demonstrate why you are good for the people who live here. Now, what does it mean to do the necessary part, right? To say that we're serving tourists. Well, specifically, there are two things that we want you in your application to explain to us. Number one, which is that your project will be significantly used by transient tourists. Now, significantly does not mean a majority of the people are using it are tourists. It doesn't have to be something that a majority of the users are tourists. It just has to be a significant number of people that are transient tourists that are using your project, your amenity, whatever it is that you're asking us for. The second word I want to define here is transient tourists. Those are not seasonal residents. Seasonal residents who own their own property up here and stay here on a seasonal basis are not considered transient tourists under the statute. So the first thing you're going to have to demonstrate is that it will be significantly used by transient tourists. And the second part of it, according to state statute, is that it will be reasonably likely to generate paid overnight stays. Now, you don't need to worry about writing this down. When you go to the website, communityinvestmentfund.org, there is the common grant application of the Community Foundation, and then there's what we call Addendum A, which has these very specific questions on there, so you can find it on the website. What you need to demonstrate is that it will generate, reasonably likely to generate paid overnight stays, and the underlining the word there, paid. It's not that my kid's coming home for the weekend from college. That's not considered a paid overnight stay. It's a stay at one of the visitor any of the bed and breakfasts, the hotels, motels, and so on and so forth. And there's some sense to that, right? The tax is collected at those locations, at hotels, at motels, at bed and breakfast and the like. And so that tax needs to generate, at least be reasonably likely to generate additional overnight stays. That is the necessary part of your application. In Addendum A of the common application, or the common application, then there's the other attachment, Addendum A, you'll have to explain why you are significantly used by transient tourists and reasonably likely to generate paid overnight stays. Once you've done that, you've checked the box which says, okay, we will consider you. At that point, it's necessary, but it's not sufficient. Once you've passed that minimum level of vetting, we now are concerned about the priorities that are listed on this page. And these are the priorities that the leadership team of this effort, which will eventually become the governance team of it, which is leaders from Destination Door County and the tourism zone. We went through months of conversations, and these are the primary things that we want you to talk about, which is first and foremost, creative ideas that have a meaningful impact on the people who live and work in Door County. Right? We want you to be creative, and you have to have an impact on the people who call this place home, because that's the whole point of this grant program. We want ideally projects that cross municipal boundaries. We want things that encourage collaboration. We're looking for ideas that leverage additional resources. In other words, if we're going to put in X, you're likely then to get other dollars as well, so that these monies are not the only funding source of that project. And then we want in total to be able to demonstrate to the residents here that tourism has made that project possible because of this room tax. It's a beautiful, virtuous circle, right? Where tourists come to our community, they leave monies behind, they're generating these tax dollars. Those dollars are then being used to provide amenities for the people who live here as well as the tourists, and that sort of creates the virtuous circle. Now, that said, it is not necessary for you to meet all 5 of these priorities. It might be that you can only do 1 or 2 or 3 of them. I mean, obviously, we need you to have a meaningful impact on the people who live and work in the county, but not every project's going to cross municipal boundaries. If it's a small project, this might be the only funding source. There may not be collaboration that's involved. It's not a requirement that you do these things, but the reality is that if you're able to check all 5 of these boxes in terms of priorities, you will be more likely to receive a grant if you do that. So with that, can we go to the next slide? So the general information deadlines for this are going to be done quarterly. These are what we've committed to for the first year. And then we'll see how it goes. Do we do it less frequently? Do it more frequently? How does the project go? The commitment is not beyond the first year, but these are the deadlines for the first 4 grant cycles. The first Thursday of April, July, October, and January. And the deadline is that it be received at the Community Foundation by 4 p.m. Central Time on that first Thursday. So the first deadline will be coming up in April. Generally speaking, we should have answers for you in about a month or so, give or take a week or 2. It depends on how quickly our philanthropic services team and our volunteer committees are in terms of reviewing it. But about a month, usually you have a response in terms of what the application is. The important thing, though, to keep in mind, and let's go to the next slide, is that we need to abide by Wisconsin state statutes. And we've spent a lot of time with lawyers, more than I ever thought I would, trying to figure out what is permissible and what is impermissible under Wisconsin state statute as it reflects the use of room tax dollars. So these requirements that we're talking about are not ours. They're not DDC's, they're not the tourism zones. It's not that we're trying to create unruly rules that make it difficult on the applicants. These are things that we are required to do in order to use room tax dollars in this creative way. And so one of the things I would say is that the easiest way to begin this process is to make an appointment to come see us at the Community Foundation. I'll talk a little bit about some different ways that we can cut and slice the statute to support different projects. But the reality is there are so many nuances to this that the best way to begin is to reach out to us and schedule a time to talk so that we can work through the details. And I'll explain why in a second. So the easiest way to justify a project under Wisconsin state statute is that you are doing something tangible. In the statute itself, it refers to something called tangible municipal development. Now, municipal in this way does not refer to something that the cities have to do. It's referring to the fact that it's occurring inside of a municipality. So it doesn't have to be a city that's actually receiving the dollars. But tangible things, the easiest things are when you're building something or you're buying something. Right, a real simple example is that we used when we were talking to the media earlier was a trail, right? A new trail system that was being expanded. You're building something that's tangible, you can touch it. It's certainly going to be something that's used by transient tourists. If you're, as a part of the entire trail system of the community, it helps encourage people to spend the night in the community. And yet, so you pass sort of the basic requirement that it has a positive effect on our tourists. But it also then has a terrific effect if that trail is used by the residents of our community. If we're using it as those of us who live and work here, is it something, an amenity that we enjoy and would be able to use? And that's an idea of a tangible thing. Buying objects, buying equipment, tangible things are the easiest thing to justify under Wisconsin state statute. It gets a little bit more confusing when we talk about some of the other ways that it may be involved. So for example, one of the more challenging things to do here would be an operational expense of an organization. However, it theoretically could be done under the guise of extended marketing or tourist information services. There are ways that we may be able to help with operating expenses, but it's a little bit harder to do so. So again, it's really about your having a conversation with us before you go through the effort of trying to fill out the paperwork, so we can talk about, okay, hey, if you come from this approach, this would be a way that would make it work under state statute. If you go this way, it's not going to work. One-time non-tangible expenses. Putting on a concert, for example, well, that might be appropriate, used by tourists, enjoyed by local residents. But again, the details are going to be an important distinction for us to help understand it. And I apologize that I don't have a real simple set of explanation and instructions for you. The challenge is that we are absolutely applying with complying with Wisconsin state statute. And we have a lawyer on speed dial to talk to them about it whenever we're not sure about a project. But we're trying to be creative. We're trying to be open-minded. We're trying to figure out how far can we push the envelope to make sure that we can use this money and spread it as broadly as possible. So the most important thing for anything is that when you've got an idea for a project, again, it first and foremost must be something that is beneficial to tourists, right? It has to be, the basic requirement is that it's got to be reasonably likely by used by transient tourists and reasonably likely to generate paid overnight stays. If you do that, and it's going to have an impact on the residents of Door County, then it's worth a conversation with us. And we'll talk to you through about here's how you should apply and here's how you should bring that forward. And I think on the next slide has the contact information that we want you to reach out to us. Give us a call here, talk with our philanthropic services team, or just drop an email. We're happy to discuss these ideas with you and schedule an appointment. And let's see if we can talk about your idea. It's going to be a bit of a learning process for all of us. My guess is, and that's why we really want to meet with people, especially the first cycle or two, is my guess is, this is Door County. You guys are creative. You guys are going to come up with some ideas that we've never even thought of that are going to push the envelope of what might be possible under Wisconsin state statute. So don't walk away. What I don't want you to do is to walk away from the grant program because you're not sure if it will fit. I would rather that you reach out to us. We will take the time to talk with you about it. We want to be challenged about how far we can push the statute, and I want to be getting on the phone with the lawyer to make sure that we're complying. And because that's what's good about it. The creativity is where we're going to find some of the best ideas. So what we really encourage you to do more than anything else is to call us at the Community Foundation, schedule an appointment, and let's talk about your ideas and we see if those things can work. So with that, that's all the formal presentation I have. Julie, I don't know if you have anything else that you want to add to that, or if there's something I missed you want me to elaborate on before we open it up to questions.
No, I think that was great. And I would just like to say we couldn't do this without the Community Foundation's direction and help. Excuse me. So I open up for questions because you all are great hands.
John, maybe we can take down the slides and then if there's questions, if people want to turn on their camera and raise their hand, and we can kind of see who's out there and we can call upon you. Or
there's a good number of folks. So if you're not on my screen and you're waiting, I'll try to find hands, and otherwise just speak up and we can take it away.
I see Rebecca's handed up, so that we'll start right there. How's that?
Okay, so I work for the library, and I'm just, and any grants that we would be, applying for aren't going to be like super huge grants, Like, if we applied for $10,000, it would, probably fund our summer reading program for the whole summer. But I'm just wondering if, this will be annually, these grants will be available annually. And then my other question is, can we apply for multiple grants for different programs at the same time?
Well, I'll take the second half of that question, and then I'll let Julie answer the first half of that. The second half is you're an entity. So whatever that entity might be, the county of Door, in the case of the library, right? The county of Door is allowed one application per grant cycle. So you can apply in successive cycles. That's certainly appropriate. But whatever the legal entity is that is the applicant, the legal entity is allowed one application per grant cycle. And then I'll let Julie comment if she has something to say about future years of the program.
Yes, Rebecca, we are planning on funding this for continued years. So all good.
All right, Natalie, I think your hand is up. You're next.
Hi there. Just curious regarding the infrastructure question requirement, just to clarify, if it is like a web-based application that
I got
Oh,
web-based
no.
application, then it stopped. Am I the only one, or?
No.
Well, apparently your web-based application isn't working as well as we thought. So
We will
we
come
lost
back
her.
to.
She disappeared from my screen, so she might have got cut off.
I think I froze.
Oh, there
Yay,
you
Door
go.
County Internet. Can you hear me again?
Yes.
All right. Can I try? Sorry, I don't know if you heard any of what I said, but just you mentioned the infrastructure requirement, and I just wanted to clarify if it was a web-based application that brought tourism and overnight stays and met those requirements. And is that something that would be considered?
Maybe. I mean, certainly would be
Okay.
considered, but again, that's one of those, we want to know what the application is.
Cool.
How is it affecting the community? How is it interacting with tourists? That's where we're going to get into. If it's not the physical stuff is the easiest to fund, right? Which is a trail, a building that's a visitor center that's used by people here. Those things are easy to fund, right? The harder ones are where it's a non-tangible thing. We can still do some non-tangible things, but we have to use a different part of the statute to justify it. And so there's the reason addendum A, if you look on the website, is required of everybody, but there are other addendums. And so based on your individual project, we might say, hey, we need you to fill out addendum B or addendum C. And that's where it really requires a conversation.
Great. Thank you.
All right, next up is Julie Schmelzer. Go ahead.
Yeah, I hope I didn't miss this. I hope you didn't say it already, but I was wondering if there's a minimum and a maximum grant amount, and is
No.
it per project or per community?
It's there is no minimum, there is no maximum other than what the monies are available. The intent, at least as was signaled to us, was about $1 million a year will be distributed through the fund, which if we're doing it 4 times a year, you can probably imagine that about $250,000 a quarter is what we anticipate. Although we might spend a lot more in the first quarter if they're great ideas. We're not warehousing money necessarily. That said, that we anticipate. So we'll also, though, by the way, if you've got a $2,500 idea, we're happy to see that as well. I think when Rebecca was talking about the library, a $10,000 grant, that's absolutely appropriate. It doesn't have to be a 6-figure grant. We anticipate when we did the planning process that the average grant when this is over would be about $100,000. But again, this is all a work in progress. We'll find out what that looks like in year 2.
Thank you.
All right, next up, Door County SWCD. You are up.
Hi, this is Sam Coyne over at Door County Soil and Water. This is about funding. So my first question is there a match component?
It is not a requirement that there be a match, but again, leveraging additional resources is one of the priorities. So if you are leveraging additional resources, that makes your application more attractive to us, but it's not a requirement.
And my second question was, it's a clarifying one. You said that the County of Door could only apply for one grant. Is that not by department, or is that truly by the county entity? So like the libraries, public health, everyone would be restricted, so the county could
Well,
only.
it's about the legal entity. And we did talk about that, very large entities as well. And the governance committee made the decision, at least for the first period of time until, I mean, we may revisit this in the future, but at this point, the way the program is structured is the legal entity is allowed one application per grant cycle. So if the legal entity is the County of Door, I don't know how it's structured. If, you know, I don't know if the library has a separate entity in terms of, I guess the easiest way to look at it is your checks, right? How is the money flowing from? If it's from the County of Door, that's the legal entity. If the library is a separate entity, then that would be considered a separate legal entity. That's however you're structured.
Okay.
Nina, looks like you're up next. Go ahead.
So Nina Herbst at Jacobson's Museum on Washington Island. I wanted to ask about the overnight stay criteria, whether it had to be on Washington Island or whether it could be anywhere in Door County.
As much as I love to stay on Washington Island, we can't force people to stay on Washington Island. It's just that we want them to stay somewhere in the county. Although if you want to go to Washington Island, it's always a great place to go. So I encourage that.
I live here. I think it's wonderful.
There
So
you go. If you look behind Jarash's, he's got the road to your space, right? So there you go. So.
We were just on that on Sunday, coming back from visiting family. Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
We're looking in the chat. I don't see any hands up.
I
at
see
the
Al.
moment.
Al's got his physical
Oh,
hand.
Al. Sorry, go ahead, Al.
I'm Al DeGenova. I'm with Right on Door County. My question is, you have, the different deadlines, quarterly deadlines. Do the requests have to be tied to those quarters, or can they be anytime during the year after that deadline?
It can be anytime you want. It just has to be before the activity occurs.
Right.
As we don't fund things that have already occurred, but and that makes sense, because if you're, Al, if you're trying to plan a writer's workshop somehow for the summer of 2024, you're not going to be applying for that now for a 2023 program, right? So that would be very appropriate. One thing is that we don't release the money until 60 days before the project is going to begin. So we want to make sure the project's actually going to occur before we actually write the check. But yeah, if you're putting out a year or two in advance, especially for very large projects, I think that's a very appropriate thing.
And you mentioned operating expenses. Would we be able to write costs, staff costs, and operating expenses tied to a particular project into the grant?
Yes, but again, let's have a conversation. You can write it in there. It may be appropriate, it may be permissible. Like there's a couple ways to look at it, right? So I'm going to pick the example of a trail, and not to get all the land trust people super excited, but I'm just going to use the idea of a trail, right? If you're going to install a trail there are staffing costs of somebody to build the trail, right? That's very appropriate expense. So it's not like you just we're paying for just the rocks to go on the trail. The construction of it, those kinds of staffing costs about it. It becomes a bigger issue when it comes to maintaining the trail, right? Because we're not constructing something tangible. Now we're caring for something tangible. Again, it's possible. That's where, again, I apologize for not having more specificity. But what we want to do is we want you to have the good idea and be as creative as you can, and then we're going to sit around and go, okay, how in the world do we fund this idea under state statute and incur lots of legal fees to answer that question? So but and we'll learn that. Again, this is as we go through this for the first, I've got memos and opinions from the lawyers already, but we'll go through this several cycles and we'll learn, okay, how far can we go? How far can we interpret this part of the statute to apply to what Al's asking for this time, which then makes sense now because Bill's asking something for the heritage, the center down in Brussels, and we'll say, okay, we can do that because we did something similar for Al. And it's a learning process for all of us. And again, this is a testament to Destination Door County and the tourism zone. There are granting programs that exist like this, but The one that I think of in the Valley, in the Fox Cities, it's a perfectly fine program, but it's all about building things for tourists. You know, we want this program, it has to do something for tourists because that's statute requires it, but it's necessary, but it's not sufficient. This is really about doing things that also have a benefit for the people who live here. And that's what's so creative about this. But it also is why it's a bit of a challenge, because there's no case law on this issue. There's no things that we have to, we're actually creating the program on the fly here. And the hope is, and the expectation is, that there may be other communities who learn from us and what DDC and the tourism zone have done. Again, kudos to our leaders of our visitor industry for being this creative.
Other questions of folks here? Otherwise, we've got some chat
I
questions.
called
that we
out
can
Bill,
jump
so
to.
you know.
Oh, sorry, Bill.
He's got to have some question now that I called out Bill.
I do have a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So my first question is, are there grant completion deadlines? Do we have to finish the project within a year or whatever?
No. Well, we want you'll tell us.
Okay.
And so you'll say, okay, you know, we'll begin in 2024. We think it'll be done by 2025. And so we'll check in with you on that, but we're not going to have a specific deadline in that sense.
Are the funds granted immediately upon award, or are they reimbursement?
Well, neither. You can draw upon the funds. Well, one correction. For a 501c3 public charity, okay, that's a little bit different if we start talking about the 501c6 organizations. The 501c3 public charities, like the museum, Bill, or the center down there, you guys, we don't write you the check when the grant is awarded. We encumber the money. We will write you the check when you are not more than 60 days away from beginning whatever it is that you're about to begin. So if you're constructing something, up to 60 days beforehand, you can request it. It will write you a check. If you're running a program, up to 60 days before the beginning of the program, we'll write you the check. So it's not on a reimbursement basis for a 501c3, although there will be reporting requirements after the fact. We don't need to see receipts and all that kind of stuff. It's more about show us the impact and what you've done. For a 501c6 organization, it's a little different because we have to exercise under IRS rules something called expenditure responsibility. And so that's why most granting organizations don't want to give to anything other than 501c3s, because it creates work for us. So if you are a 501c6, there will be higher documentation requirements. There will be higher issues that, more paperwork to do so that we can keep Uncle Sam happy. But it's just, we have to do it if we're going to get a 501c6 the money. And what I would say is, rather than bore, looking at most of the names here, you're almost all public charities. If you are a 501c6 and want to talk to us, come in and talk to us and we'll walk you through it.
Thank you.
Brett,
One last question.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Bill.
Will there, you mentioned reporting, will there be regular reporting required or just at the end?
Depends on the size of the project, right? I mean, if this is a multi-year project, because we'll probably ask interim reporting, but if it's a simple defined thing that accomplishes itself in a matter, in less than a year, we'll probably just ask for a final report. Part of it's just magnitude of the money. I mean, if you're getting $500,000, which would be a huge grant under this program, then obviously we're going to want a little more accountability than if you got $5,000. So,
thank you.
The goal, though, is not to create an onerous reporting process. It's about making sure we comply with IRS rules and making sure that we can explain to all that are involved how the monies that were spent are accomplishing the goals required under state statute, as well as affecting the quality of life. We want to remind people that tourism is one of the things that helps make a lot of Door County special, a lot of the amenities we enjoy. So that's where the reporting will be. We're less concerned about show me a receipt for something you bought.
Thanks.
Paul Brophy, it looks like you had left a note in the comments about reporting. If hopefully your question was answered about that. If not, if you have any additional reporting requirement questions, maybe now would be a time, since Brett just talked about that.
I'm good, thanks.
Okay. Great, Paul.
Another question in the chat: can multiple organizations apply for a joint project?
We hope so. We want you to. Now, like any grant project, though, somebody has to be the responsible party, right? So a collaboration might involve 4 different organizations, but we can't write 4 different checks, right? We're going to write one check to one entity. So there's always a lead entity that's always the applicant, but it's a collaborative effort in the sense that there may be 4 entities that are working together to make that happen. And in fact, what often happens in a collaborative is, organization A is the lead entity with regard to the money from the community foundation. Organization B might be the lead entity getting money out of the state of Wisconsin, or so on and so forth. So you can all have different roles to play. And in fact, we want collaboration. We want to see organizations working together. We want ideas that cross municipal boundaries. But that said, ultimately, there's always one applicant. One of the things, by the way, you might want to think about answering to the question that came up earlier from Soil and Water, our friends at Soil and Water, is, if there's a partnership that, let's say, Soil and Water has with Crossroads at Big Creek to do something, some particular project, it might be that Crossroads at Big Creek is the applicant for this cycle because Mariah and planning are applying for a grant under the County of Door for something else, right? And so one of the things that we will require, by the way, is these things always require the signature of the highest ranking paid staff person, or if there's no paid staff, it's an all volunteer group, the highest board chair. The reason we do that is because sometimes an organization has to make choices, right? You can't have more than one application. So we want to make sure that the person in charge, so the superintendent of the school district, is the one who's applying for something for Sunshine, because Sunrise, as opposed to the high school, because we don't want to make the decision as to which one ought to be the applicant. The person in charge of the organization should be making the decision as to what their application is for that quarter. Again, but the good news is you're never more than 90 days from another deadline. So, it doesn't take that long before you get to do it all over again.
More questions in the chat. I'm trying to get through them all as we go here. Brett, question was, can one legal entity hold more than one open grant at a time, even if they were submitted under different application cycles?
Yes. One application per cycle, but it doesn't mean that the project has to be completed before you submit something in a second cycle. Now, that said, part of the goal here is to make sure that the community as a whole have opportunities. So, it's probably less likely that if you apply 4 cycles in a row that you're going to get 4 grants in a row. It's probably not very likely to occur. Then again, if yours is the single best idea, part of what our mandate is at the Community Foundation is from the evaluation committee is good ideas get funded over all other considerations. And so it's possible, but again, it's probably pretty unlikely that you're going to have a lot of open grants at one time, but you can.
Other questions from anyone joining us today?
This is Tammy from the clearing, if I could, please.
Please.
I wanted to find out, we've been talking for a number of years, an interpretive trail, and we've been slowly making our way through. Granted, we have trails on the property already that have been maintained over the years, but this is a special one that it'll be an interpretive trail with plants and shrubs and flowers identified and, wildlife. We have been working with an artist for artist renderings of the actual flowers and things. Because we're kind of in the midst of this project, but yet no money has been dedicated per se to it. I think we would have to have a conversation as to whether or not this could be something to apply toward that, just because on the one hand, yes, we're in the middle of the project in some ways, but really it hasn't kicked off at all, in many ways.
Well, just a comment, there really wasn't a question there, Tammy, but I get what you're saying. What we won't do is pay for something that's already occurred. Right. So it might be that it's okay to say that we've done planning work, we've got renderings of this, but we haven't actually graded the trail. Well, you don't grade trails in quite that way up there, but created the trail or created the pathway or put gravel down, or we haven't put the signage out, but we have the signage designed. So we've designed the signage, we won't pay for that, but we would pay for the actual creation of the sign and put out, for example. your project, there's two parts of it. So your project, I guess I want to make this clear too. Your project passes easily the necessary part of the test, right? Because somebody's going to go up there, stay at Crossroads, or not Crossroads, I'm sorry, stay at the clearing, right? Or stay in the community while taking classes at the clearing. That's clearly is permissible under state statute. So in that sense, it's an easy connection. But once you pass the minimum qualification, that stuff is no longer considered. Now, the only thing we're considering is how will this make the lives of the people who live and work in Door County better, right? So that would be the other argument you're going to have to make, explain to see, well, how is this something that somebody who lives here but isn't a tourist, it isn't a visitor, how is this going to be something that they're going to use and enjoy? And that's the case that you'll have to make on that part of it.
Yeah.
Our job at the Community Foundation is to make sure that we comply with state statute and help you make the best case. But it is not our place, not our philanthropic services team. It's not my place to say yes or no to your project. There is a team of people who will, of volunteers who will make those determinations. What we're here to do is to make sure we comply, and then B, to make sure that you put your best case forward. And that's why it makes sense for you. I cannot stress enough the value of coming to talk with us advance. I don't know if I saw Kagan Haringa on this call. I used to joke that Kagan Haringa was the only person who won the Community Foundation trifecta, which is like got money out of every grant cycle. Because Kagan used to come in when she was in charge at Crossroads, and she'd come into the office at the beginning of the year and say, okay, here are like 12 ideas of things I'm thinking about for this year. And we talk about it. So, well, that might make sense for our women's fund, or that might make sense for our green fund, or that might make sense for healthy water, or might make sense for this community investment fund, right? Having that conversation really allows us to help you make your best case to our volunteer committees that make the decision. So interacting with our team, our philanthropic services team, is really important because they're the ones that are going to be your guide for this process.
Thank you.
All right, Brett, we're going to go back to the chat to get a few more questions.
Okay.
Couple from B. Johnson here. Have you considered testing this new process with some examples, including some that are borderline qualifiers?
Testing with whom? I guess I'm not clear with the question. We've certainly tested ideas. We went through a process where we literally I said, what would you like to do with the money? That's one of the questions we asked of the DDC leadership and the tourism zone leadership. And we had pages of flip charts with little post-it notes of every idea you could possibly imagine. And then we took those ideas and we sat down with the lawyers and we said, okay, read the state statutes and let's talk about each one of these project ideas. So in that sense, we tested a lot of those things by trying to figure out with the attorneys, the guy provide us counsel is to say, this one fits for these reasons, this one doesn't fit for this reason. And in that dialogue, it really helped us understand what may or may not be permissible. But even there may be things that aren't quite right, or we're not quite convinced. That's where we're going to involve counsel to be the ultimate guide as to whether we can or can't do the project.
If I could butt in, John.
Yeah, please.
John, if you finish reading my question, was the test would be some borderline qualifiers and put those to the community foundation to see what the outcome of their process would be and make sure it meets what the DCC wants this grant, or how this grant process works.
Well, I certainly think that that's going to happen, right? I mean, we're going to have what we're creating is a governance team. So there's two different entities in this process. There was sort of the task force of DDC and tourism zone folks who kind of came up with the parameters of what we have here. They are going to form the initial governance team. The governance team does not make decisions about whether grant A or grant B gets a project. There is a separate grant evaluation team that will make those decisions. But those decisions will then, the idea is we're going to call a governance committee meeting as soon as we've done with the first grant cycle, which is to say, okay, let's talk about how we feel. Is this consistent with what we thought we wanted to see with projects? What are we feeling good about the kinds of things we're funding? What are we not seeing that we'd like to see? And we'll do that pretty regularly for the first year as we sort of work through this. Because I can guarantee you that having done this for 25 years, that the ideas, the parameters that we have established right now will not be precisely what the parameters are 1 year from now. Because inevitably we will learn something once we have the real world examples of ideas.
I'm actually suggesting, rather than do the testing process live, that you actually do it in advance. I understand the process that these go through the Door County Bureau and then go to the grant committee that's set up. I just think sending some practical examples that test the what you might interpret as the widest deviation from the expectation that might narrowly miss qualification, or the misqualification narrowly misses being qualified, just to make sure that the results coming out of the community foundation are what the overriding board believes to be representative of what they expect.
And I think that we did that. I mean, we
Okay,
went through lots of ideas.
I'm unaware of that. I haven't seen a practical example, or I'm unaware. That might be my problem because I haven't followed this very closely. The reason I joined in today is to ask these questions, to have clarification and a better understanding, because the issues are heavily discussed in the Gibraltar Township, along with those that are on the different boards associated with this process. Thus, I bring the question to you.
No, it's a very reasonable question. And certainly, these are monies that, I mean, each municipality had to approve the increase in the tourism tax, right? Which then is monies that are being drawn upon to do this. So everybody has a right to see and to be comfortable and confident that the monies are being used in an appropriate way. We did do a lot of testing. We did talk about a lot of ideas. We did game out of what these things would look like. And so we feel very confident that we have a pretty good idea of what we want these things to look like. And we're at that point now, after having, I think we spent 8 months doing this work. We're now at a point where we're ready to launch it, and we're going to see what the real world provides to us. I mean, at some point, you can only game theory so much. At some point, you just got to do it and see what they are. We're confident that we have had the opportunity to try these ideas out. We did not try them out publicly, obviously, but we tried them out internally at the foundation. We tried them out with the governance team. And at this point, we feel like, that's why we're here, because we have a deadline in April, and we're going to see what happens. And we're confident that some really good things will come from these dollars, and encourage everybody who's got an idea to come talk with us about how we might be able to help.
Brett, thank you for that response. I was unaware of the testing that was done with the foundation with examples, and that's what I was looking for. That's what I was looking for.
Yeah,
thank you.
Absolutely. Good question.
Brett, another question in the chat from Mr. Phillips. Could one legal entity submit a broad application that encompasses multiple projects, such as the library and SWCD?
Probably not. I guess it depends on how broad you're thinking about. In other words, the city of Sturgeon Bay couldn't come up and say, we want to build a new band shell in one park, we want to improve the beach in another at Ottumba, and we also want to deal with parking issues on 3rd Avenue, right? Those are 3 separate issues. And so they really should be 3 separate applications. That said, if they're doing something, we're improving the beach at Ottumba, and at Ottumba, we're going to put in new sand, we're going to build a new playground, we're going to do, several things that are segments of one larger improvement effort. I think that would be very appropriate. But they have to be germane to each other. You can't really have unrelated projects to try and squeeze in things, because it's hard for the evaluators to sort of evaluate them, because they're multiple projects, they're separate things.
Real quick, I did make an error in the email. It's grants@givedoorcounty.org on that. Amy, thanks for pointing that out. Next question, Brett, you sort of touched on the evaluation committee, but Brent had asked, if they had already been chosen, and if so, how are they selected and who are they?
They certainly have been, there already is an existing grants committee that we're going to use. One of the things that we do at the Community Foundation is we don't talk about who the evaluators are when they make these kinds of decisions. And the reason we don't talk about that publicly is because we don't want the process to be tainted by the politics and the lobbying, because we're such a small community, right? It's difficult if I'm not on the committee, but let's say I were on the committee and you knew I was on the committee and you're my neighbor, it'd be very hard for me to have to make a decision that might be in the best interest of the program and the best interest in the community, but it might be then me having to vote no on your particular project. And so we don't want the process to be influenced by outside forces. What we've tried to do and what we always do at all of our committees at the foundation is look for people who are community leaders, people who are well respected in this community, people that if you knew who they were, you'd say, yeah, those are the kinds of people that I have faith and confidence in. We also made sure to have some people who had some familiarity with the tourist industry, the visitor industry as well, to make sure that they have their perspective is brought to the conversation. But what we really wanted was that group of people to be able to make independent decisions without any kind of influence. The larger, if there are political implications for what we do, the governance team will always make those decisions. And ultimately the governance team sets the criteria that will be used to make these decisions. But the evaluators themselves are things that are just an internal process.
Cheryl had asked if contractor bids are required to justify costs.
Contractor bids, not necessarily a bid, because that means you're pretty far along in the process. You could theoretically come to us with a contractor with an estimate that hasn't given you a bid. You may very often, like if you're building a big project, the general contractor in the fundraising stage of trying to find funding for it will give you an estimate, but these things haven't been bidded out yet. We don't need bids, but we will need somebody of some reasonable experience saying that we think project X is going to actually cost this amount of money. That said, if the project comes in considerably less with the bids, then we're going to talk about that, because we're not going to. And part of this is how that works. Remember, we don't release the money until 60 days before the project begins. So presumably you will at some point, we might say, yes, we're going to fund the project. Then you go out to bid and you find out the project was 90% of it. Well, realistically, we're probably going to come back to you and have a conversation, because if we want your project to succeed, if we've said that we're going to fund it, but if there's savings to be had, it's not like we're going to put it in our pocket at the Community Foundation. It gets granted out to somebody else on the screen. And so, we urge everybody to recognize that the monies that you save by being judicious and wise are monies that are immediately going to go dollar for dollar to the other people who do great things for our community.
Cheryl also asked, if a grant application is declined, will you explain why, and can we reapply in the future for a similar project?
As we do with any program at the Community Foundation, if we turn you down, you're always welcome to reach out to us, and we will do our best to interpret why the evaluators made the decision that they do. One of the things we force evaluators to do, by the way, is when they say no to something, we make them explain it. It can be very uncomfortable to be an evaluator at the foundation. You can't just say no because you feel like it. You've got to articulate a reason why that makes sense, because we want to understand what the reason is so that we can provide education and counsel to the people we're turning down, as well as use that as a guide to help interpret what the current constitution of the committee believes are common ways of future ideas. So if you do get turned down at the foundation, you are always invited to call our philanthropic services team, and they will have a conversation with you about what the thinking was of the committee. Sometimes you might find yourself saying, you know what, if I address that concern or do something a little differently, it's worth my reapplying. Others will say, you know what, that's so far off. I get what they've said is so inconsistent with where we want to go. We're just going to take a pass and not reapply for that idea. Our goal here as the professional staff is never to say yes or no to you, but we do want you to have a reasonable understanding of how likely or unlikely your project might be funded. In other words, sometimes you're going to look at the idea and we're going to say, look, traditionally the committee doesn't like this, that, or the other, and you're doing this and that. And so if you're going to bring in an idea, this or that, now, if you can make a really good case as to why we should do this or that, maybe you can get the committee to agree to it. But we want you to know that you have a little bit of an uphill climb so that you determine for yourself whether it's worth the effort to put the application in.
Another question from Bill. Is there a process to file a question as to why a grant was given to an entity?
Well, you can just certainly ask us. It's usually not a question we get a whole very often, but certainly we'll be having that conversation with the governance team. And what will be public, denials will not be public. If you apply with an idea and your idea is not funded, that will never be shared outside of the community foundation. What will be shared are two things. All of the stuff before the application, right? The priorities that are established, the people that were involved in creating the program, where it's an open book on that side of the equation. And once a decision is made to fund something, that's an open book on the other side of the equation, which is this was funded, here's how much, here's why. If you really want to know, give us a call. There's nothing secret about it. But it's the work in between that is not in the public eye. And obviously that involves people that we might deny. If somebody's denied, that won't be shared.
As far as I can tell, I think that was all the questions that were asked in the chat. If you left a question in the chat and I missed it, there were one or two that I think were already answered. So I didn't ask them again, but now's your chance. We've got about 4 more minutes until 11 o'clock. Meredith, looks like you got a question.
Rebecca's question made me think of this. I'm just curious, if an organization applies for a grant and it's granted for a new program that might continue into the future, like the library adds a summer reading program or the Ridges starts a new summer camp for kids and it passes all the criteria, would they be able to apply annually for that same program in order to keep it going in perpetuity? Or does this have to be only for new, would they have to apply for a one-time grant with the future in mind? Because you can only apply for the same program once.
Under the current guidelines, you can apply as often as you want. I would caution the word in perpetuity. I don't think we're going to fund anything in perpetuity, but you can certainly reapply for a good idea in the successive years, and the committee will make a determination whether it's the best idea at that point. Obviously, the committee rotates as well. The committee is not a fixed group of people. Every year, the membership changes. But if they determine that this particular project was a good idea this year, that obviously means it's consistent with the criteria. It's possible that it gets it next year, but we don't know what the competition is going to be. So there's no guarantee that it will be funded in successive years, but you certainly are welcome to apply, at least under the guidelines that we established right now. Again, at this point, some of the questions you're asking, like this one, are what's going to happen after the second year of the project. Right now, I can say you could absolutely apply in the second year, but I can also guarantee you that that what we have articulated today will evolve. And so what's happening a year from now will not be precisely what we do here, because going to Bill's question earlier, we did lots of testing internally. We did lots of testing with ideas and projects. We're in the hypothetical. Now we're doing the real. And inevitably, when you go from the hypothetical to the real, there are going to be some changes that are going to unexpected things. So we're going to evolve. So we can't make a commitment to what we will do a year from now at this point. But under the current guidelines, we would certainly be able to fund it again in the second year.
I have a question about the impact of the competitors during a grant cycle. If you've got some many very great projects in one grant cycle, will they be cut just because of the number of them and the amount of money they're asking for?
So the sad part about this is it's inherently a competitive process. It just is, right? We have to, and we can only look at the things that are before us, not the things that we think might one day be there. And so you look at the grants before you, and you're going to make a decision of what gets funded based on on what's before you. So to your point, I would fully expect that April deadline is going to be highly competitive. And it might not be as competitive a cycle or two down the road because there's a sort of a pent up demand. Everybody's going to want to rush in there with their ideas. That said, we deliberately do not allocate a specific amount of money per quarter, because if they're really good ideas, we hate to just not fund a really good idea because we're saving money for next quarter in which the ideas might stink. You know, I mean, it's just the reality of it. And you find yourself frustrated by that, right? So it's, you know, we try to mitigate those issues, but again, competition is inherent in this process. And while we try our best to make sure that good ideas are funded regardless of when they come in, that's always a possibility. Mind you, what we will say to you, by the way, though, is if we turn you down for that very reason, which is that they were just phenomenal ideas and yours was just a very good idea, we'll tell you it was a very good idea. You really ought to come back to us next quarter. I can't guarantee it's going to be any different, but we really liked it, but for the fact that there were others, so we'd like you to come back again. And we do that all the time.
Thank you.
Brett, another question. This one from Ned. If I can just get down there. He asks, you spoke of tangible municipal development. How does that relate to programs at any one organization?
It does not relate to programs at all. Tangible municipal development, first off, municipal in the code, as the lawyers explained to me, goodness knows I'm no lawyer, but in the legal opinions that we have from them, doesn't refer to a municipality as a unit of government. The tangible part is the important part that you think about. Programs typically are not tangible. So we may be able to fund a program, but it's not going to be under that part of the statute that refers to tangible municipal development. It'll have to be under another part of the statute. And that's why if you've got operational expenses or one-time non-tangible expenses, those are where it gets a little more challenging. We still might be able to do it, but you really need to sit down with us so that we have a deep understanding of what you're trying to do so that we can figure out how do we navigate the weeds of subsection, paragraph, whatever, to say under that part of this is how we're going to be able to fund your project. That's our problem, right? Your problem is to have good ideas and to do great things for the community. Our problem is to figure out how do we figure a way to contort ourselves to stay on the right side of state statute, but see if we can help you. Now, that said, there are going to be times where really good ideas are just not appropriate for this grant program. It's just our hands are tied by Wisconsin state statute here. It's not DDC, it's not the tourism zone, it's not the community foundation. It's the source of the money and what the legislators have said in the state statute of what we can do. But we will do our very best to try to be creative and thoughtful and be innovative so that we can be as innovative as you're being when bringing these ideas to us.
Everyone, just so you know, we still have a few more minutes. It's after 11, so if people need to get going, that's fine. We will have the recording of this meeting available on the communityinvestmentfund.org site later on this afternoon. So if you or anyone you know would like to watch this again, it will be available there. So.
Hi, this is Sam from Soil and Water. I have just another question. Can land acquisition, is that an allowable use of these funds?
Absolutely. Believe it or not, that's tangible municipal development. At least that's what our lawyer says.
Awesome, thank you.
So do we have any more questions? I guess not. Well, if I can just say, I think everyone who applies for this grant is in really good hands with Brett and his team. And thank you so much to the Community Foundation for providing that support. And I think a couple of things that I'd like to just call out. This will be a learning year. And we really want to encourage you, as Brett had said, be creative, be collaborative, and do great things. And We anticipate to see a lot of that. And I think the other thing that really I wanted to just reconfirm is that it is necessary to benefit the visitors, but it is not sufficient unless it supports our residents too. And I think those are just really good words to end this with. And we want to thank you so much for taking the time. And Brett, thank you for all of your insight and information. And as Brett had said, please reach out to the Community Foundation if you have any questions related to an application, because they are there to help you to ensure your success. And I think that will be the most important part of this, is all of us will be successful based on moving forward. So I think
Well,
that's it. Brett, do you have anything else to say?
No, it's the process begins. Go to the website, read the information, and then give us a call or drop us an email. Let's get together and talk about it.